All right. Awesome. Just a second. All right, it's fine now. I think let me share the screen. Right. So, welcome to lecture 10, video B. So we are going to begin to look at a practical example or a practical question about the test of controls on inventory and production cycle. So I'm gonna jump straight to that question, and that is activity 7.3.1. Right. So as always, when you get a question for auditing, you always begin by looking at the required part of the question so that you gain insight as to what the examiner expects you to do. So in this context, they were asking you to refer to the working paper A1, which is what, of course, is contained in the case study scenario. So they want you to refer to working paper A1 entitled Inventory. And in that working paper, they are expecting you to describe the tests of controls excluding audit procedures using test data that you will perform at the inventory count of Gold Rush as at 28 February 2021, right? So that's what they want you to do. Now, one of the things I want you guys to pick from there is the fact that the test of controls they are asking for here, they have nothing to do with a computerized environment. All right. Why? Because of the type of system you're going to be evaluating in the context of the scenario given. We are going to be looking at inventory counts. And from the notes that I discussed with you guys in part A, I did mention to you that with inventory counts, it is made up of 3 phases, right? So in the 3 phases of inventory counts, what you're going to discover is there is what they call before the count activities. Then there's what they call during the count activities and the after the inventory count activities. Very, very important to be able to disseminate. So these are the notes that I discussed with you, of course, in part A. So as I discussed the test of controls, I'll also refer you to what you would find here, because one of the things that you do, or rather that you observe as you go through the scenario, you discover that there are test of controls which have something to do with before the count activities. There's test of controls whereby you'll be assessing the during the count activities. And then, of course, the after the count phase as well. Right. So that's what you're going to discover as you go through the scenario. So without further ado, let's quickly go from the top and see what is contained in this particular scenario. So you're one of the trainee accountants working on the audit of Gold Rush Pty Limited, Gold Rush. Right. Now, I want you to observe this is a private company. Now, your audit senior has presented you with the following working paper on Gold Rush. So let's see what is the working paper containing. So obviously the client is this particular organization, which is Gold Rush, and it is for the period ending 28 Feb 20.1. That's their year end. And who prepared it? It's R. Leroux. And on the 26th, of course, that's when it was reviewed by Miss S. Chatty or S. Chetty then. What was the subject? It had to do with inventory. Right, and this is just the working paper reference number. So now Gold Rush's inventory at year end will consist primarily of raw materials, packaging, materials, and finished goods. That's what makes up their raw materials. So, and then raw materials are gold, silver, metals, zirconia, stones. So it's zirconia stones. There's like some special stones, right? Gemstones, pearls, and beads. Now, that's what you would find under umbrella of raw materials. Packaging materials are mainly tin boxes in which the jewelry is sold. And then, of course, finished goods here would refer to finished jewelry in its packaging, ready for delivery. Gold Rush will have no jewelry in the work in progress phase at year end. Very important to take note of that. So what can we draw from this? Essentially, what we've just read from this paragraph, of course, continuing up to that part, it has something to do with the background information about this particular audit client, which is called Gold Rush. So what do we draw from that? We see the type of inventory items which is sold by this, which is handled by this particular organization. So obviously there's raw materials, there's packaging materials, and then of course there's finished goods. With the raw materials, we see that it's quite a number of items from gold, silver metal, zirconia stone, gemstones, and all that. All those things fall within the umbrella of raw materials. Why? Because they are in the business of manufacturing jewelry. Okay. And then, of course, the packaging, simply because the jewelry have to be packaged properly. All right. So the packaging materials, which is those tin boxes, right, in which the jewelry will be kept as it is sold, it's part and parcel of the inventory items for this particular organization, right? Very, very important, right? All right. Sorry about that. Right. Now, second paragraph, they're telling you Gold Rush uses, let's see. Gold Rush uses an automated perpetual inventory system. The system was implemented 2 years ago, and it has been operating without major changes or problems. The system operates as an online real-time system for authorized users to download and obtain data easily. So what is this? This is just to tell you what is in place in order to record an account for the inventory items that this organization have. So this is a computerized system that we are being introduced to here. But remember the context of our required, it did not want us to give test of controls which have anything to do with the computer system or with the computerized system. It only has something to do with manual system only. So that's what we are supposed to focus on. Now, the system is maintained on a central server, and all computers are connected to the server via a wide area network, which is WAN. And then to gain access to the automated inventory system, users must enter unique username and passwords on computers connected to the network. All of this just to do with the computer system. But remember, the type of test controls we are supposed to give, they should have something to do with the inventory counts, all right? With the inventory count. So that should be our focus area, the inventory count. So we want to assess or to evaluate the inventory count procedures. All this information that I've read thus far was to get you guys to have a background info as to what is going on within the context of this entity, right? So now let's let's evaluate the inventory count. So now a member of the audit team will attend the inventory count of Gold Rush as on 28 Feb 20.1. The COO, Dan Brown, has provided the audit team with the following memorandum with details on how the inventory count will be conducted. So let's see the memorandum. It's sent to the audit team coming from Dan Brown, which is the COO, when this was issued on the 25th of Feb 20.1, which is a few days prior to the actual inventory count. All right, very important. Meaning to say that there has to be what we call before the count phase that has taken place. There has to be a before the count phase that have taken place. And we are expecting that before the count, there should have been a planning meeting that was held, and which is probably where the memorandum that we are going to be evaluating, that's where it's emanating from, where they would have probably discussed about how the count will be done, what inventory items will be counted when, and then of course by who, and the floor plans, preparation of the warehouse and stores. We're expecting to see all these things being there, and we're going to perform the test of controls to just assess whether these things are actually in existence. So now, subject here, inventory count of Gold Rush for the year ending 28 February 2001. Now, the inventory count of Gold Rush will take place on the 28th of Feb 2001 at 5 p.m. Manufacturing and dispatching of jewelry will not take place on the 28th of Feb. Why? As the warehouse will be prepared for the inventory count between 8 o'clock and 4:30 on that day. Right. Wait a moment. So this information, it has to do with what they discussed at the planning meeting. Already we are seeing there's preparation of the warehouse and stores, which is taking place on the date when the count has to be conducted, right? So how are we going to ascertain indeed whether preparation of the warehouse will take place or has actually taken place in this case? That's my question to you.
Can you please repeat that?
Okay. I'm saying, how are we going to ascertain, or how are we going to determine whether there is, warehouse preparations taking place between the 8th and, between 8 a.m. and 16:30 on the day when these things are going to, when the inventory count is going to take place?
I'm assuming from the minutes of the meeting held prior, because now this is to be taken, like this memorandum, it was released days before 28th.
Yeah. When was it released, by the way?
The 25th of February.
On the 25th, yeah, which is some few days prior to the actual count, right? I think for now, you know what we can do? Let's read through the entire case study, so that you can see what is happening. And then when I read it for the second time, it will be now an issue of identifying the problem areas, and then I can be able to point out to say, this is what you can do to perform the test of control. Is it fine?
Yes.
I think that would be better, yeah. Okay. Now, so we now from this information, clearly, we see it's part of before the count phase. Counting teams will consist of 2 staff members each. The counting teams will consist of 2 staff members each. The counting teams, a floor plan, and the responsibilities of each counting team will be provided to the staff members when the count begins at 5 p.m. Had the question been requesting us to identify weaknesses, to me, this would be a weakness, because how can you just provide floor plans, define the responsibility of each count team, right when they are about to begin with the count on the day? Because by 5 p.m., that's when the count begins to take place. So in other words, that's when we now have what we call during the count stage. The floor plans have to be available to the count. By that time already, the floor plans should have already been made available. But when were they made available to the counters? That is before the actual count. All right, but anyways, because the question is not asking us for weaknesses, let me not address something that is not being requested. But in any case, we have to determine whether this is actually taking place. Right. So now sequenced inventory sheets will be printed and given to the counting teams. Okay, so obviously with this one, you can just inspect, to determine whether that is the case, whether the inventory sheets are actually sequenced, Now, the inventory sheets will contain a list of inventory item numbers, the inventory descriptions, cost prices, quantities on hand according to the automated inventory system, a column for the first count quantities, column for the second final count quantities, and a column for differences between the quantity on hand and the second final count. All inventory items are labeled with an inventory item number and its description that are indicated on the shelf where the item is stored. Before the inventory count begins, Dan Brown will walk through the warehouse to make sure that all the inventory items are in actual fact labeled. The inventory count will take place as follows. So what they are now explaining to you, this is how the actual count, during the count, this is what will be taking place, right? So far, everything that we've been reading, it has to do with before the count, right? That's what I can pick from this paragraph all the way up to this paragraph. I'm talking about this particular one here. It had to do with before the count. So now from this particular arrow going down, it has something to do with during the count, and perhaps we might even have the after the count stage as well, right? Very, very, very important, right? So now let's continue. My Jim, so sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that. Right. So now the inventory count will take place as follows. Let's see. The counting teams will collect inventory sheets from Danny Brown and sign for them on the inventory control sheet. You know, we have a problem because from what I'm seeing here, okay, before I continue anyways, but this is just me thinking out of the box. I want to take you back to this paragraph. Counting teams will consist of 2 staff members each. All right. Remember, each team must be what? Must be supervised, right? So it is supposed to be made up of counters and what? And supervisors. That's what makes up a count team. But here, I'm not seeing that taking place. So just thinking out of the blues, that could be considered a weakness. But anyways, let's continue. So the counting teams will collect the inventory sheets from Danny Brown and signed for them on the inventory control sheet. The person that was supposed to be doing that is the respective supervisor of the count team. That's the personnel that was supposed to be responsible for doing that. Nonetheless, it's not the case. Now, the inventory items must be identified by comparing the inventory item and its description on the inventory sheet with the label indicated on the shelf, right? So we are going to have to do some comparison here, or to do some matching of what they're telling us here to ascertain whether this is so. Now, proceeding further, one staff member must count the inventory items and the other staff member must record the quantity on inventory sheet in ink. Once the inventory item has been counted, a green sticker will be attached to the inventory label on the shelf. If damaged inventory items are identified, they are marked with a red sticker, and Danny Brown must be notified, as this might result in a potential write-down of inventory. Right. So meaning to say we can inquire with this guy just to determine if ever he is made aware of this. Right. And then the counting teams must sign each inventory sheet when they're finished counting the inventory items assigned to them. So obviously you will inspect for the signatory of the count teams on the count sheet, you know. And then once the counting teams have finished with their first counts, they must submit the inventory sheets to Danny Brown and then sign the inventory control sheet. The counting teams will then sign for the inventory sheets of another counting team to start with a second final count of the inventory that has already been counted by another team. As soon as items, this is like duplicate of efforts anyways. Now, as soon as items have been counted for the second time, with second final time, a blue sticker must be attached to the inventory label on the shelf. Danny Brown will supervise the inventory count process and must be informed immediately if any problems are experienced during the inventory count. As much as he's supervising, but it doesn't seem like he's really actively involved. Mind you, each count team must have supervisors, but that's not happening. Anyways, Danny Brown must sign next to the differences, if any differences exist between the quantities on hand, and the second final count. Danny Brown must recount the inventory items if differences are found between the first count and the second final count. Counting teams will only be formally dismissed once the count has been complete and all queries have been attended to. Interesting stuff, eh?
Yeah.
Now, so we want to perform the test of controls. Remember, with performing or drafting of your test of controls, what you guys need to remember is that you need to have your buzzwords, okay? Action verbs. How are you going to test what is taking place there, right? So we're going to go back to where they begin to introduce us to the inventory counts again. Now, what I'm going to be doing now as I go through this content, I will be, like pinpointing now problem areas, or information of value that you can actually use to perform the test of controls from. So that's what I'm about to do just shortly, right? So now a member of the audit team will attend the inventory count of Gold Rush on the 28th of Feb. 2001. Now, the COO, Danny Brown, has provided the audit team with the following memorandum with details on how the inventory count will be conducted. So let's see the first point. The inventory count of Gold Rush will take place on the 28th of February 20.1 at 5 p.m. All right. Manufacturing and dispatch of jewelry will not take place on the 28th of Feb 20.1. Why? As the warehouse will be prepared for the inventory count between 8 to 4:30 on the day. There is a problem area here. Why? Because we are being told of procedures that are taking place before the counts. So the procedures that are being explained to us are as a result of probably what was discussed during the planning meeting. For instance, one of the things that we can already see, it has to do with the when part. They've already explained when the inventory count will take place. And also, if as we go further with the case study, you would also see that they did mention about who will be performing the inventory count. And just right at the beginning, when we started with the case study, we saw what inventory items they will be counting, all right? And of course, the instructions as given in the scenario, they did mention, of course, that it will be given to the counters on the actual day, right? But now remember, we are not addressing weaknesses. So I would not want to point out any form of weaknesses. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to point out some test of controls for you here. So starting with the first one from this paragraph where they are talking about the inventory count. So how are we going to ascertain, remember, whether there is preparation of the warehouse taking place? What can we possibly do? So obviously we can perform a walkthrough test on the day of the count, right? From let's just say on the day of the count between 8 a.m. and 16:30 p.m. to ascertain, or rather, let me use the common words that they usually use, which just so that, but it's to ascertain, to determine, or to ensure it's one in the same thing. So anyways, let me just use the common one. So it's to determine whether the warehouse area will be prepared prior to the actual inventory count. Is it making sense, this level?
Yes.
Right. That's a test of control. Why? Because, I mean, they're telling you procedures they're going to do, right? I mean, those are like control measures they have anyways, right, for the count. So they are telling you they will be preparing the warehouse between this time and that time. So we want to know whether this is truly the case. Because they can say, yeah, we're going to prepare the warehouse between 8 a.m. and 16:30 p.m. But come at 5 p.m. when the actual count is supposed to take place, we only discover that there was no preparation of the warehouse. But if we do a walkthrough test on the day of the count, between this time and that time, we'll be able to determine whether the warehouse area will be prepared prior. I mean, we'll be prepared, prior to the actual inventory count commencement. What I'm giving you, you also find it in the, in the, what you call it, in the feedback. It will be there. But I don't usually love to just give people exactly what is on the feedback. You need to understand how did they get to this. So if I just simply read this to you guys, it's not going to add value to you because it's something that you can read off by your own or on your own, as a student. But you understanding how they got to this is where value gets added. So that's what I'm trying to achieve. Hence, you see, I'm making sure that as I read through a paragraph, I explain to you what test of control can be drawn from that. Now, second paragraph, counting teams will consist of 2 staff members each. The counting teams, a floor plan, and responsibilities of each counting team will be provided to the staff members when the count begins. Now, there's another procedure that you can also confirm, all right? So how are we going to confirm whether the counting teams is indeed consisting of 2 staff members each?
Will they be notified prior?
Sorry?
I'm assuming they will be notified prior.
Yes. So how are we going to confirm if they are truly existing? We need something that shows their names, isn't it? And
yes, maybe error code of some sort.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right? So we're gonna request for a list of count team members details and perform verification checks or identity verification to ensure that at least 2 out of each count team are actual staff members of Gold Rush. Pty Limited. So what are we trying to, we just want to confirm if this is true, because they can tell you, yes, there's gonna be, 2 staff members each and stuff like that. But how do we really know for sure that is what is on the ground? So we have to request for a list of count team members details and perform verification checks or identity. Actually, this would actually make more sense. And perform identity verification checks. Identity verification checks to ensure, right? To ensure what? To ensure that at least 2 out of each count team are actual staff members of Gold Rush Pty Limited. Right, that's what we're gonna do. All right, and then another thing that you can also do, because we are now told count teams, then a floor plan and the responsibilities of each count team will be provided to the staff members when the count begins. All right, so one of the things we're gonna do, we can actually interview the count team members to determine whether they have been provided with the floor plans, right? With the floor plans, count responsibilities, and instructions concerning their responsibilities during the actual count of inventory items. Are these things making sense? So you have to interview this guy. Interview the account team members to determine whether they have been provided with the floor plans and instructions concerning their responsibilities during the actual count of inventory items. So we can do that, that particular procedure there. Now, there's another thing that we are told here that you can also do. Remember the floor plan, it should align to the setup that is in the warehouse. True or false? True, right? So you can
True.
request, right? For a floor plan, right, from the COO and inspect the warehouse area to identify whether the setup corresponds. So the setup I'm talking about here is the setup in the warehouse agrees with the floor plan. Because the floor plan gives you how the warehouse is designed, what sections are there and what not. So the only way for you to verify whether that is the case, you need to actually have the floor plan and then you agree the floor plan against what is happening on the grounds. So you have to inspect the actual place or the actual area and agree it against or match it against the actual floor plan to ascertain whether the two corresponds. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Right. So that's imagine we've already have like 4 procedures. So request for a floor plan from the COO and inspect the warehouse area to identify whether the setup in the warehouse area agrees with the floor plan provided. Right, something like that. Then let's continue. Okay, so all these things will be happening at 5 p.m. So they said. So I wanna try and open another footnote here. Right. So sequenced inventory count sheets or inventory sheets will be printed and given to the count teams. The inventory sheets will contain a list of inventory item numbers and all of that. Okay, cool. So one of the things you're gonna have to do, you're gonna have to inspect the inventory sheets in use to determine whether they have been appropriately sequenced for the purpose of recording the details during the inventory count. Okay, so it has to be something like that. So you just want to ascertain whether they are whether there's actual sequencing of these documentations. So that whenever you are testing documents, all right, you have to inspect them. So you're gonna have to inspect the inventory sheets in use to determine whether they have been appropriately sequenced for the purpose of recording the details. The details obtained during the inventory counts. So that's one of the things you can do there. Let's continue. All right, and then the one of the things, of course, it will also be to inspect the inventory count sheets, you know, for those details and stuff. So the inventory count sheets will contain a list of inventory item numbers, the inventory count, so inventory descriptions, the cost prices, quantities on it, the column for the fair, okay, all those things. right? So now we have to inspect the completed inventory count sheets. So that's the part I'm going to put here, where we can inspect the completed inventory sheets. Not only for those details, but let me just put a simple one first before we go to the details. So inspect the completed inventory sheets for the signatory of the respective counters and their supervisor. That's a simple one. Number 3, again, still, while you're inspecting the completed count sheets, one of the things you're going to be inspecting them for, you're going to be inspecting the completed count sheets to determine whether all the corresponding fields have been completed accordingly for, right? What is it for? Remember, for the initial count and the final and second count, all right? For